It's mid-March in 2020, and there's something new under the sun and the rain. Around the world, we are being introduced to something new called social distancing. And ironically, this may bring us all together. Now, if you're a writer, by temperament and profession, isolation is not something new or threatening. But what I do find disturbing is that suddenly, for the first time in human existence, there is nowhere on the planet that I can safely run away to. This is unprecedented. There is no longer any Tahiti for Paul Gauguin. Consequently, it strikes me that our adventuring will have to occur inside ourselves. My friend Yosef Wosk has been making that interior journey for decades, so what better time than now to pay him a visit?
I was never a young man. I was born with the beard and glasses.
Well, I saw a picture of you once where you looked like you were basically stoned, and you looked like 20 years old, and you did not look like you look like now. So you were obviously an adventurer from a very early age, and I'm just saying that if we can no longer venture to these faraway places, maybe it'll make us go inward more. Maybe we have to explore inwardly now while we're in a different human phase.
That's what it is. Hi. the inward push that's been caused by, or our reaction to, the virus is a long time coming. The look outwards preceded, and maybe the inwards is a type of reaction, and it's a reaction too. That's why you have fundamentalists and people who hold on to things. They're living in the past, and the future is a threat. However, the people who live in the future, if you cut off your tradition, you've lost all that wisdom. I'm not asking for balance, never.
Well, how is this a new crossroads, or obviously you're explaining it in a way that this crossroads has been around for a while?
Here, the view of the universe, the physical universe, at least our astronomers tell us, 100 years ago, 120 years ago, we thought all there was were what we can see at night. And then over the centuries, we realized that we were part of a family, this small sun family, and then and then that sun, we realized, was just part of larger families. And then over the centuries, you saw that we were part of something we called the Milky Way. The heavens pouring their milk upon us because we were the center of the universe. And God created us in His image. That's awesome. And the blessing was to pru urvu umilu et haaretz, be fruitful and multiply and milu, fill the earth. We've done that. We have fulfilled the deepest biblical blessing in a physical world, and now the spirit is starting to catch up. Whether it speaks through science, which means knowing, or religion, which is a pathway. And the size of the physical universe, we now know that we don't know. It is so beyond our imagination. Not really, but I've been thinking about this for a long time. As one of my favorite woodcuts, it's maybe from the 1500s or 1600s, and it's a young man. It looks like an explorer, an adventurer, and is looking through all the realms around the world, all the spheres, and then he pokes his head out at the end of the universe and is looking around. That's where I've been for a long time, and it starts to hurt my head because I'm banging against it, the ends of the universe. And now this virus is giving us this inward thought. It's no longer that communal and under the king or something. It's with the printing press, that was a radical jump in technology and in democracy. Because now more people knew, more people were responsible, more people were interested, and now it's boom, it's radical individualism.
An extreme optimist would say this pandemic could be a good thing because it's teaching the world to act collectively for the first time, and the whole world feels threatened, and the whole world has to marshal its forces to solve an enormous problem. And then if we can learn how to do that, maybe we could then go on and collectively solve the problem of global warming and the environment.
It's good. That's what the consciousness this virus is forcing us into, or shepherding us into, is good, but not absolutely good, because we've had to suffer. Individuals and communities have had to suffer. So that's and it's a mortal suffering. So what are they, martyrs to the cause of the rest of humanity? Yes, but it's also tragic as individuals. I mean, the communists and others, not in theory, but those who had political dictatorships of the people, they killed more than, I mean, maybe in Russia it was 20 to 30 million, and in China minimum 30, maybe up to 100 million.
Someone in your history, as a Jew, has a deep understanding of freedom, and all I would have to do to verify that is ask you to tell me the story of your grandfather and how his hair went gray.
I don't know if this was in Odessa, or the family had some farmland outside in another small village, and that was ancestral farm, because my great grandfather was I believe it was great grandfather had been kidnapped by the Tsar's army when he was 12 and forced to serve with the Cossacks and others from over the empire for 25 years. And when he returned home, Jews weren't allowed to own land, but because of his service he was allowed to purchase. And then the other Jews who were involved in agriculture with a chicken or a goat or planting, he would allow them to. And my father remembers stories from there too. He loved being on the farm, churning butter, licking off the fresh milk fat. And so years later, 1917, my father was born November, although we always celebrated his birthday on July 4th, because when the family came here in 28, he was 11. It was a new land of freedom. And so he named it, years later, he named one of his companies, Liberty Investments, and we always celebrated his birthday July 4th. And it was only later, once someone got a glimpse of his passport, and I would be too respectful to really look at it while he was alive. And when he passed away, we were going through some documents, and it was there, November, I forget what, November something, 1917. But he became a new, born again, a new person in a land of liberty. And so maybe you and I come from the other end of the spectrum. You're 5 generations here, and I'm the first generation born here. And here in the garden, thank God, I've learned for a few seconds here and there to feel at home. Mostly, I still feel like I'm a temporary resident here.
Well, one difference between you and me is my family history doesn't have a firing squad in it.
So why my father's family left Odessa is pogroms, and this is after the revolution, or in the first years of the revolution, and towards the end of World War I, and throughout Russia and in Odessa. So one night the police came, or the army, and they rounded up all the Jewish men in that area and took them to the tavern and lined them up, and they were ready to shoot every second one. And my grandmother knew one of the policemen, and she grabbed whatever money she could find, a gold coin or something, and gave it to him, so he would let who was my grandfather, Yosif, who I'm named after, they let him go. And he was still in his, maybe, I should never thought, how old would he have been? I'm gonna have to look that up. But I'm guessing about 35, 40 years old. And he went gray that overnight.
He went gray overnight after he survived the firing squad.
After he survived the firing squad, and then they bribed someone who would take them out of the country. And the night before they left, my father remembered. They went down to the basement with what rubles they had, like in a wheelbarrow, and they stood at the furnace and they threw in all these rubles. Strange, right? They left the country only with a small diamond that my grandmother sewed into the lapel of my father's little boy, into his jacket, probably an old torn jacket, and that's what he wore to Canada. And
so when they arrived in Halifax on the ship, they just had the diamond and nothing else?
That's right. And they went down to the basement in Odessa, in the apartment building that they owned, I was told, and they threw all the hundreds of thousands of rubles, the paper, into the furnace, because they didn't want to leave it for the enemy. They're already leaving their country, the building, their family, their friends. They don't want to leave.
I thought they were doing it to get heat.
Oh, I know a Zen story like that. Imagine you're in the desert or in the polar regions, and you're getting through the day all right, but at nighttime it becomes freezing. And if you don't get something to warm up, you're going to die of hypothermia. So if the Zen had their scrolls, they would either wrap themselves up in their scrolls or feel just as comfortable lighting a fire and living another night in the warmth of their scroll. And the question back to me was, well, would a Jewish person do that with the Torah? Okay, so, and I could imagine wrapping yourself in like a person at first wouldn't do it, but to save your life, you would wrap. That's so wonderful. Oh, because it's usually, we're told, Eitz Chaim hi lemachazikim ba. It's the tree of life to those who embrace it. But in this way, the tree of life would be embracing you. That's what we were talking about before, the inner and the outer, or the macrocosm, or the theoretical and the practical. And it's got to be both. I saw a quote last night: if it's not paradoxical, it's not true. True may be squeezed out from between the two paradox. Whoops! And it's not off. It's not often in words. Words can't go there.
The only thing I can even think of to contribute in return is the story which I think Tolstoy wrote about, but maybe it's an inherited story from other religions through other times, but I came across it reading Tolstoy.
Yeah.
And it's a very simple story, and I tell stories badly, so forgive me. But there is a man who is being chased by a tiger. And the tiger is definitely going to catch up to him and kill him. And he comes to a cliff. And he looks down at the edge of the cliff, and there's a dragon down at the bottom of the cliff. If he jumps off the cliff, the dragon is going to eat him. And if he stays any longer, the tiger is going to get him. So he sort of falls off the cliff, and he's falling down, and as he falls, he grabs a branch, and he's sort of hanging there. The tiger's at the top looking down at him, and the dragon's down on the ground ready to eat him, and as he's hanging there on the cliff face, he looks over and he sees a little wild strawberry growing on the cliff face, and instinctually he leans over and he eats the strawberry.
Wow.
So that human quest for delight or nourishment or food
or sex. I heard.
Okay, well,
I heard Mort Saul. It was on probably not the Ed Sullivan show, but it was one of those.
Now I'm going to drink a toast to that.
Yeah.
to the quest. Well, I think you have another story about your father, I believe. Wasn't it in the haystack? Wasn't there? Was that your grandfather or your father where they were hiding under the straw?
Yeah.
And I don't have a story like that in my family background.
That was my father as part of the pogroms.
What happened?
So probably within a few months of them escaping. And so once they were out at the farm I was telling you about, and he and his brother Ben, they were in a hay wagon that someone else was driving, a Ukrainian. And the Cossacks came riding up on their horses with their guns, with the bayonets fixed, yelling, "Zid, Zid! Jew, are there any Jews here?" And they, my father and uncle, they were younger boys, they burrowed down under the hay right to the bottom of the wagon. So the bayonets went in and missed them, I don't know by how much. And then sometime after that, they were back in town in Odessa. And again, the Cossacks or some force came in as part of the pogrom, and they knew it was a Jew's house, and they were looking around, the adults, I'm not sure where they were, and they looked around, and my brother, my uncle and my brother, they hid behind the wood. In those days, you didn't have central heating, so the fireplace, and especially on cold Ukrainian nights, that's a good name for a song, right? You just have the wood stack and the one central where you do the cooking, and that would also be the warmth for the whole place. So they hid behind the big wood stack inside there, while the others were looking around to capture and kill.
Did you grow up with those stories, or did you only learn those stories much later when you were an adult?
I first heard little bits of these stories when I was young, because I would ask. They didn't tell. My mother especially, she didn't want to remember. She was born in Pinsk, which was in eastern Poland. Now, after the war, it's in western, in Belarus. And they say Pinsk. Where's Pinsk? Not far from Minsk, which is true. It's about an hour drive, and they're in Belarus. And so my mother remembers also the persecution. Eventually, her father got a work permit in Canada, and because Canada was underpopulated, oversized and underpopulated, so they made it always very welcoming. So they advertised throughout Europe, especially for immigrants to come settle. So he went to Edmonton, Alberta, worked for 3 years and raised enough money and brought my grandmother and the 3 daughters. My mother was the oldest of 3 sisters.
And so you are the beneficiary of those courageous lives. So that explains to me why you have a motivation to pay back, to help others, and that the source of your philanthropy must be familial.
So when you say familial, it is knowing the story, not just knowing it, feeling it, while wanting to be an individual, myself, whoever that is. I still feel anchored in a familial story and responsible to it. I could not have had the freedom to think, to act, maybe to be, but in so many ways, if it was not for the gifts of my parents and all kinds of gifts and struggles, both that historical, the roots, and then the personal, the achieving independence of thought. I was embarrassed by the family name being out there in the community. My father would do the advertisements, Wosk's Limited, and there'd be full page ads in the Vancouver Sun and Province, and I'd see him working on them sometimes at night, and so if I'd be out and people would hear my name, I would be embarrassed by my name and where I came, who I was. So I grew up very embarrassed, like ashamed, hiding. Because if they knew I was the Wosk, then you feel like, it's associated with, and then if they knew I was Jewish, like, what school do you go to? Oh, Talmud Torah, the Jewish day school, and I felt, now they know I'm Jewish, and so the persecution and that feeling of being uneasy came up.
So are you saying this is somehow the reason why you've turned yourself into such a prolific giver? Whatever you're going to tell me now, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. So I should just skip to the follow-up question. What is so interesting about the way you have been a philanthropist is you are a creative giver. You've turned it into an art. You you see things spontaneously that you want to grow, and you, instead of being an artist making the art, you empower other people to be creative, and that in itself, you've turned in philanthropy into a kind of an art form. The way you do it with no committees, you don't have people fill out forms, you do it on the instinct of your heart. I've seen you do this where you say, hey, and you make a decision in 5 seconds to back somebody, and you hadn't known before that you were even going to do it. That is a very odd way of going about it. So I'm really interested in this part of your character and how it came to be. And that's why I'm asking you about your parents. Like, how did you turn into such a strange philanthropist?
Dr. Strange.
Okay, yeah. So
which is a good film,
so
too.
I'm glad you're willing to admit that you were an oddball when it comes to the way that you operate.
Yeah, so
please tell me about how you operate and why you think you operate the way you do.
Well, giving and contributing to charity was always part of the nature of our family, and it went through a lot of stages. There was an old tradition in the traditional Jewish homes of having at least one, a pushka, which is a charity box, and you'd always be putting, whether you're taking from your pocket on purpose and saying this is going to, and eventually it gets distributed, or if you have loose change. But in the old days it wasn't a luxury to have loose change, so this was your charity box. And then my father was very generous, and I remember one of my favorite TV shows when we were kids, because you're asking, did it come from family or from where else would it have come? It was called The Millionaire. Do you remember? It was black and white on TV. You would never see the face of the millionaire, and he would have his shaliach, his messenger, who you'd see his face, and he would say, Mr., and he'd give him an envelope, and then they would tell the background story, this person, and because of that, my feeling is this person is both good and is in need of, or it would help out somehow. So here's this envelope, please deliver this $1 million anonymously to this person. And I thought, that's incredible.
You told me once there was another TV show that somewhat inspired you.
Oh, The Lone Ranger, yes, that's
right.
right.
The Lone Ranger.
Hayo Silver and Away, and Kimosabi, and the Masked Man.
Because...
Oh, so maybe I've conflated the two.
Yes, because the Lone Ranger rides in and solves the problem and then rides away mysteriously, which is kind of... That's more your modus operandi, is you see something that needs to be saved or grown, or so you jump in like nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Only you're like the opposite. You're like a good thing. Nobody expects you to jump in out of nowhere and say, "Here, let's fix it with this."
Right.
And that's how I see you operating. You like to make it into a surprise. You don't want people writing you 50-page proposals and then there's a committee that looks at it and there's talk and you actually want to really you're acting out some sort of heroic role.
Oh, so let's give it a name: guerrilla philanthropy.
Okay. You are not a logical thinker. You're actually more astrological in the way you look at the world. That logic is only one small component, and you are more interested in astrological, universal, non-logical thinking at the same time. and that makes you unusual. It's your birthday. You're an Aries. Does that mean anything to you?
Yeah, I was speaking with a friend, Laura. She's also an Aries, and Aries, at least in our conception of astrology, is the springtime. So right away, that whatever society developed that, they were in the northern hemisphere, because if it's March in the southern hemisphere, it's probably autumn or something. That's what I want to know, both the particular, and I want to know the general.
What are the characteristics of Aries?
So Aries is of the 12 signs in the zodiac. Aries is the ram, and it's the first. January, Aquarius, and into February, does it go? That's the first of the English calendar that starts in January, but in terms of so January is the first month of the year, but Aries is the first astrological sign of the year, because that's springtime. That's the birth, the beginning of in our hemisphere.
So how does that relate to you? You're a creator of all these, the Philosopher's Cafe, the Vancouver Children's Festival. You go ahead and get things created. Is that how you equate to the sign?
Well, Aries is also has a military bent. It's based on the planet Mars, and it's the red planet, the blood planet, the god of Mars. But if those powers or inclinations can be harnessed for creativity, and it's the time of the blossoms. It's the time of the flowers. It's the birth of the animals. The whole earth is being reborn, and so that's part of the Aries character. If you can embody it, so you feel like you're blossoming all the time.
Well, may your birthday be another year of growth.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, now that's take one. We've got to do this 2 more times.